Welcome to the Centurion Response podcast, where we speak with faithful business leaders about their experiences following Jesus at work, at home, and in their communities. Hello. Today I've got with me Traci Cheatham, the founder of B23 Strategies. I'll explain more about what that is and who she is in a moment, but thank you first, Tracy, for joining me today.
Oh my gosh, Pete, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be with you.
You know what? Actually, let's have you describe B23 a little bit, what the services are, because I've got a focus within that I want to drive things to. But let's have you lead with the broad overview about how you think about the company.
Yeah. B23 Strategies is a leadership and personal development company. We work a lot with teams and managers to help them perform better. We work with top performing individuals and entrepreneurs and solopreneurs who are wanting to grow their impact and influence. We really take a holistic approach to leadership development. We believe that in today's world, I mean, we are whole people, and we bring our whole people to work. and for us to be effective in our leadership, we really have to be effective as self-leaders and really understanding ourselves. So we spend a lot of time on self-development, obviously, on understanding ourselves better and understanding the world around us better. And we do that by kind of layering story and our talents and our tendencies and our triggers, and we align it with action, and then all of it drives toward healthier relationships, because relationships are really what makes the world go round, and especially in today's environment when you're talking about business.
Good. So when we've talked, a portion of what I find really compelling is that if the C-suite is either the brain or the mouth of the organization, meaning both where things originate, but also how things get consumed, I think of the managerial layer, and this is based off of our conversations, but it's the metaphor that I've made peace with, is the idea that the managerial layer is the liver. And the liver has to process the toxins coming from within and from above or whatever. And that a healthy managerial layer creates a healthy liver, which is what makes for a healthy body and the ability to adapt, make change, and that what's required for a liver to be healthy is different from what's required for a brain, a heart, or muscles to be healthy. And the impression I get is that the most critical part is how a liver or a managerial layer deals with toxins. And so you can launch from that metaphor, or I know your experiences, both you and Janelle, have been in large corporate settings and have had experiences where that metaphor, as you described your experiences, that's how I got to the liver thing.
Yeah. So. It's interesting. I think that the managerial level, I'm super passionate about. One, because if you look at the trends of today and kind of these trends that have started basically in 2020 through, the pandemic and on the post side of the future of work that we're sitting in, these managers have to be healthy because they drive 70% of the engagement of an organization. And engagement right now is, people have been talking about engagement forever, okay? It's not a new buzzword, obviously, but the game has changed and it's becoming more and more and more important. If you can't get your culture right and you can't get your engagement right, you're losing. You have any idea how much, take a guess. Do you know what the annual cost is of low engagement globally?
Well, I'm going to try to call BS on engagement as a real number in the first place. But if I think about turnover, lack of performance, you're talking about like a percentage of overhead?
Yeah, well, yeah, just general cost. And all those things.
I would say that the slider on engagement's a good 30% of the efficiency of an organization.
Yeah. And globally, it costs about $8.8 trillion. So it's about 9% of the GDP. And, and all the things that you just mentioned are looped into engagement, right? Call time off, accidents at work, lost time. productivity issues, all of these things. But there's a very different feel and performance measure and look that comes from someone within an organization that is excited to be there, and someone who feels valued and someone who feels seen, versus someone who feels like they're in a transactional mode, that they're just, checking boxes.
I don't think anybody likes to feel like human resources as a term is nobody likes to feel like a human resource.
Right.
Sadly, I think a lot of times the alternatives that organizations use have a feel good, a bubblegum flavor to them. So talk to me. I mean,
Yes.
I'm bringing this cynical perspective on this,
Sure.
and I think this is going to be useful.
Yeah.
What would you say?
I said rightfully so. I mean, it's a cynical environment in a lot of ways.
Well, so what's the difference between good engagement and meaningful, life affirming, in the end, engagement that recognizes that people bear the image of God,
Yeah.
versus people who are there as transactional widgets or whatever else. I think there's a lot of cheap agenda type stuff. I mean, it turns out I'm also very cynical on a lot of the ESG type rationales, a lot of things that to me feel like Robin Hood rationale. So talk to me about the healthy thing. Like, I love what DEI should be if it's coming from a place of prayer and like, here's what respect and honor looks like.
Yeah.
When it is Robin Hooded, it becomes a really negative deal.
Yeah.
And so I think it's incumbent on faithful leaders to do these things well. And it's too bad when they get leveraged into doing it by people who are focused more on power rather than honor.
Yeah.
So help me understand healthy from unhealthy.
Yeah. I mean, all of that is great. And I mean, like, and you're spot on. And I want to take a little bit of a step back, in terms of just, the question that you posed about, like, what does healthy, effective leadership look like in this space? And this, my heart on B23 and how it came about. And really it boils down to, this is going to sound simple and probably like Pollyanna to some people, but it boils down to love. I mean, and I don't mean like, oh, like you're my buddy love. I mean, like, I'm going to fight for your greater good love. Like, I'm going to liberate you love. And we have moved away from the relational aspect of how we can even grow together. And, when we talk about initiatives like DEI and even in initiatives like that, the heart of what that should be, and to your point, not being Robin Hooded, but I mean, like, it should be creating a space where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued for their unique experience, because we're all different. We all experience life differently. We've all grown up differently. We have different backgrounds. We have different ethnicities. We have different, expectations that we've grown up with. And, so many times we get so laser focused on our way. And I think that, a lot of the divide even that we see, all across the America today kind of falls into that. Like, we have a lot more similarity than we do difference, but we isolate and we focus on the differences, and we kind of shame and or downgrade people that look or act or show up differently than we do.
So if it starts with love, so I've worked with several businesses that have really cool programs. And it seems like the way love is meant to be delivered in an organization is that the C-suite person has to say, this is what we're going to do. I owe it to my Lord to love my people well, to honor them well. But that executive should not be the one who manages the program.
Right.
The best instances I've seen, there will be a dream manager, or there are a variety of different roles that show up, but that person's job is not to defend the rightness or wrongness of the program, not to make the economic value choice, but to do the thing with the people. And I mean, you see it, a great head coach with great assistant coaches. The assistant coach's job is entirely different. I see within good marriages that there are complementary roles, and they don't necessarily fall on gender lines at all. There is just one is more the alpha and one is more the supporter, and there's a way that we pick up roles. What have you seen, and maybe this pushes us back to the managerial layer of affection,
Yeah.
that where do you see it go well? Where do you see it go wrong? How do you know that you're dealing with a client you can actually help versus a client that is going to be a loop?
Yeah. Well, we say that we like to work with forward-thinking organizations that understand that people are their greatest asset because, firmly, I mean, if we're speaking from the heart lens of God, I mean, like Janelle and I both, as B23, strongly believe in the power of people because we believe in the power of the one who created them,
Okay.
right? And so we believe that each person's been given a unique set of gifts and talents, and they've been given an assignment that they're supposed to do on this earth, and we want to help unleash them to do that in the best possible way. I think that when you talk about leaders and managers, there is some difference, and there is a lot of similarity and a big gap that needs to actually close. Because if you think about, when I think about leadership, and I think about people who have been called to become a leader, and I mean, leadership's always been a role for me that like I've just been called to. You know what I mean? It's always been something that I was attracted to, and I do believe that when you've been called in that space. To whom much is given, much is expected. I mean, that's a huge responsibility because by today's standard, even in talking about the fact that, used to be 20 years ago, you would show up at work and you would leave work, and then home never really bled into work, and work may or may not have bled into home. But now it's fully integrated. And, when we have bad leaders who, or bad managers, however you want to put it, who are utilizing bad practices, stuff rolls downhill. I mean, like stress, like frustration, anger, all of that stuff rolls downhill. And it doesn't just affect the person at work. It affects how they show up at home, which then affects their families and their kids and their community and all of these different things. So when I think about the leader, I think that, the leader's responsibility is to cast really good vision. And by today's environment, if we want to keep and retain the talent of the future, your vision has to be compelling, but you have to be purpose oriented. Because if you look at basically, we're at a real divide right now, to be honest. I mean, like we've got the baby boomers who are still kind of in, some of these upper leadership roles. We've got the people that are kind of our age that are in these upper leadership roles. We've got the up and comings, the older millennials, the Gen Zs, et cetera, that are moving toward some of these roles. But there's a huge gap and divide in that current leadership space and age and how they communicate, and the people that we're trying to elevate to the next level of leadership. And we're seeing a big transition that's going to happen, right? Because, this transference of wealth or whatever it may be. I mean, like, a lot of these people are retiring. I mean, they're moving on. I mean, like, and organizations are struggling right now to find and retain top talent. And I think a lot of times they think it's because they don't want to work, but the data really suggests that it's not that. It's that the mission and the vision isn't compelling enough for them to want to be there because they want to make an impact. If they're going to work, they want their work to matter. And so from a leadership perspective, I think at the top, some of the best things that our top leaders can do is to kind of create that strong vision, and then to really lean into and help their managers develop, because most of these managers in most small to mid-sized organizations have been put into management roles because of technical skill. They've grown up their technical food chain, right? But no one's really taught them how to effectively lead or how to effectively engage. And especially right now, the biggest push is like employees want their manager not to be their boss. They want him to be their coach. So going back to this whole, team, like, if you think about head coach versus assistant coach, they have different roles and responsibilities, but their roles and responsibilities are focused on the player to make the player better. You know what I mean? And so that's a big gap right now. I mean, like the upskilling of our managers in that space. And I feel for them. I really do. Because honestly, like if you look at and you know me, I'm a data nerd. I mean, like literally, I get excited. This is so dumb, but I get excited when the Gallup state of the global workforce report comes out. Like I literally like get excited to read it. And you know, all of these
That
trends.
qualifies you. Yeah.
Was that?
That qualifies you as a
Yeah,
nerd.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm a nerd. I can't help it. But you know, what's so interesting about all of these data sets um, is that we have seen, even if you look at like post COVID, you look at like whether it be engagement numbers, well-being numbers, whatever it may be, some of these softer things that some people have a hard time, you know, wrapping their brain around because they think, oh gosh, you know, well-being is a big deal. So I'm going to, you know, do some wellness perks, you know what I mean? But wellness and well-being are not the same thing, you know what I mean? And it's even helping create a common language that everyone can understand as to how to kind of move people, you know, forward and through the food chain. But overall, these managers they're in a tough space because the amount of work hasn't changed, right? And every time that you turn over a team or every time you have a new team member or whatever it may be, the dynamic of that team changes, right? And also, most managers weren't trained how to have a hybrid or a remote workforce, and it's a different way to engage people when they're hybrid and remote than it is when you have them in office. And there's I think the latest statistic is that about 50 to 55% of the current managers that are out there are feeling pretty burned out, and it's really
Yeah.
hard to develop someone else when you are struggling yourself.
So this is an interesting moment. This question has a slippery focus. So
Yeah.
I tend to be focused on the owners or the people who heavy as the head that wears the crown. They know what that feels like. They know what it is to lay in bed at night knowing that their decisions are going to impact the lives of many families.
Yeah.
And at a managerial layer, that's not the same burden. There might be things you're stressed about in the performance reviews and a sense of burden, and good management will also be aware of how their choices impact people. But it's a different sort of deal.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, so you were at a large pharmaceutical company. Janelle was at an like one of the big auto manufacturers. So certainly you had the opportunity for burden, but it seems like what was put upon you was a task and function pressure and a like how fast can I go on the treadmill,
Yeah.
as opposed to an overall heavy as a head that wears the crown. And I've never met an owner who has that crown who expects the people under them to take that burden on. They understand that's theirs.
Yeah.
But it's a really tricky thing to find the right kind of ally between those two roles.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that's where my question goes is how do you see your role in developing good alliances between the one who has the final mantle on them and the team who wants to care, who wants to invest, but also maybe is even grateful that at the final analysis they haven't had to be slapped awake to the same trauma
Yeah.
that crown produces for others. Talk to me about what good alliances look like and why they matter, maybe to the CEO first.
Yeah. Well, I think honestly, um, you know, the CEO burden, to your point, I mean, like they're not passing that burden along. They know that, you know, that the organization rides on their shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that they also have to realize that, again, through the lens of understanding that people are your greatest asset. I mean, like, there has to be an alignment. There has to be this common ground that we're focused on and that we're growing toward. And, you know, and it's even interesting. And again, you know, me being my data nerd, spouting all my statistics, but, you know, most leaders, C-suite leaders believe that they are very effective communicators. I mean, like if you were to ask them, I mean, that's how they would self-report, and that they feel like that, you know, they say it and their organization knows what to do. But in reality, it's about 25% of what is said is actually heard or believed. Um,
Yep.
so
Well, so to that point, there is a paternal burden, and you are the patriarch when people can project their daddy issues on you.
yeah,
And like we were talking earlier, that this week I I told my daughter that in a moment she was being unkind to her brother, that kid, and she didn't hear, right now I am making unkind choices. She heard, Dad thinks I am unkind. And kindness is one of her core values. And it took a lot of repentance and clarification. And she's she might have to be an attorney. She's like, I don't want to talk. You're just going to self justify. This is an 11-year-old who's like throwing me around.
yeah,
But what I saw was my voice is so much larger than any other voice in her world, that and it's she's looking for essential identity direction from my feedback.
yeah,
If you're the CEO and if people can project their daddy issues onto you, you can't give crisp, clear vision or um, corrective feedback. You need a translator. You need somebody else to do it.
yeah, yeah,
And there are certain things I can say to my daughter that will work, and I can lift her up really well. But if I'm not careful, I can't steer her without really doing damage.
yeah.
Is that a similar thing that you're seeing in the corporate
Oh
space?
yeah.
Are CEOs like dads that way?
Yeah, yeah. And in some ways, I think managers are as well. I mean, it just
Yeah.
depends on it depends on the dynamic. But yeah, I mean, like when you are in a position of authority, you know, as humans, we still do respect that, for the majority. I mean, the majority of us,
Right.
and so that does come with a weight and a burden. And we all have different leadership voices, right? We all show up a different way. We all have different personality traits. We all have different strengths, and because of that, we have to be aware of the audience that we're talking to. Now, to your point, I don't expect and would never expect any C-suite person. And if this happens, I mean, I'm sure it does happen. And if it does, I would love to interview these people because I think that they're probably golden. But I wouldn't expect most C-suite people to fully be, oh my gosh, I have to be completely aware of every single person that I'm talking to, because I mean, there's too many, right? There's too many
Right.
layers, too many things. But really what we have to do is we have to have that language be repetitive enough, and the actions of the leaders be repetitive enough that it builds trust. Because when you build trust, just like with your daughter, yes, you guys had a moment, you know what I mean? Like, this is a moment, and it didn't go well, and and what she heard wasn't what you
Right.
said, but that's how she took it, and it took a minute,
Right.
to kind of move through that. But at the end of the day, she knows that you're her dad, that you love her, that you're fighting for her greater good. She knows that you know her core values, that you understand who she is as a human. And, in that moment, because emotions were high on both of your sides, it was misunderstood. But when it was talked about and walked away, she still knows you're her dad, you care about her, and you are fighting for her greater good.
Well, and that's where, I mean, I'm a professional communicator. I tend to think of myself as a good communicator. So when you talk about that 25% among the CEOs, that's cool. You might be a really good communicator, but who you communicate, the audience defines, you know, what skills you should use. And to your point about being aware of the individual, the CEO who goes around and says, I need to be aware of every person. I think maybe it's more critical to be aware of who I am
Yes.
when I'm talking to somebody. Who am I to this person? And if I am dad, well, here are about 3 things you really need to know. Like, your voice is going to be extra loud. You are defining at a core level. So if you're the CEO, being clear about who you are there, or if you're the boss, wherever you are on that structure, I don't think it's about the art of the communication so much as it is the awareness of who you are, like what your name tag says in their eyes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
No, I think you're right.
so,
Yeah.
so let's talk about the engagement style that B23 has. Like, my understanding is that it's best for you to have buy-in from the C-suite and a certain level of agenda and clarity, but that where you make the best sense is in training managers to, well, maybe it's about training them about their name tags, and so how they manage their name tags up and down.
Yeah.
But maybe I should shut up and let you tell me what the best engagement model is for you.
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, like obviously we have to have buy-in at the C-suite level, and my heart for that level is that I want organizations to thrive. I mean, like when I read well-being, or it's actually a book by Gallup called Well-Being in the Workplace. One of the things that Jim Clifton said in that book was, the world is in need of a miracle, and that miracle is found in the spirit of mankind. And it gave me chills when I read that, because I mean, like I had a visceral reaction because in organizations, I mean, like of the 5 elements of well-being, and well-being, we'll get to that, how that ties to engagement and all these different things. But well-being right now is so incredibly important because like we as a society, I mean, like 4 in 10 of us are struggling, you know what I mean? And that's either with anxiety, with depression, all these different things. And these numbers are continuing. They're not going away. They're either holding steady or they're growing. And in the workplace, we're seeing daily reports of higher levels of anxiety, higher levels of stress, higher levels of feeling lonely. All of these things, they're ticking up. And that's just not a trend that we want to see. And the other crazy part about that is that of all of the areas of well-being, the number one driver that can affect the other 4 is the workplace, because we spend so much time at work. We spend so much time doing whatever it is that we feel as though we're called to do, and being influenced by the people around us, but also being an influence to those people around us. And so, for me, the C-suite person has to understand that, yes, I have, a clear-cut vision and mission for my organization and my company. And I do believe that my people are my greatest asset. And I want them to be able to work at their greatest level. And then to do that, really requires that upskilling of the manager, because like I said, 70% of that variation is at the manager level. I could arm you with data sets after data sets, which I won't, but I could, just around the importance of what this manager holds in this environment. And, it used to be like, hey, I'm responsible for X number of widgets, and I'm going to make sure that my people are creating X number of widgets, and we're going to do the thing to make sure that they create X number of widgets. And it was all about systems and structures and processes. And now it's about inspiration, and it's about leadership, and it's about communication, and it's about relational health, and it's about having people feel as though someone is for them in the organization. They want to know when they join an organization today, what's my growth path? Like, what are my options? How do I know that you are going to care about me enough to help me succeed in this role? And that sounds a little maybe a little self-centered, but really it's not, because I think people are just craving work that they feel as though they are able to make a great contribution for, and also that they're able to be recognized for. And I'm sure you've heard this. I'm sure you've seen it. I know you have, because we've had a conversation about it, I think on the about a soccer team once. But when I was in leadership, and I'm passionate about this for a couple of reasons. One, I know what it feels like and looks like to be a good leader because I was one. And I also know what it feels like and looks like to be a bad leader because I was one. So, I know what happens on both sides of this fence. Okay. But one of the things that I've always said, that just from my very early stages of leading people, was that I felt like it was my responsibility to get inside of their heads and capture their hearts to help them know that they were capable of achieving more than they ever dreamed that they could. And when you have people like that on your team, and you've captured them like that, they will run through walls for you. I mean, they will be the ones that stay late. They will be the ones to say, what can I do to help? They'll be the ones that say, okay, Pete, I think we have an issue here. Like I'm coming to you because we are so relationally strong that we as a unit are making things better, and we want this organization to succeed and to grow. And that's just not the case. I mean, like, for most teams right now. And I think that that if we can get the C-suite to think about doing things a little differently than what they've done before, because, like I said, these aren't new issues. These issues have been around, but the value of these issues, I think, is greater than they have been historically, because we're looking at economic changes, we're looking at job changes, we're looking at technology changes, we're looking at all of these different changes that have happened and happened quickly, really, since the post-pandemic. That we have to really turn our focus back to the heart of the matter, which is our people, and really regenerating that.
Well, so the point of departure on this may not be in your wheelhouse, but I would imagine you could speak to the dynamics that go around it. So I was talking to a friend recently whose point was people haven't had to pay for cash since about 2004. So it's a rare leader who understands now what it means to pay for cash, and that part of what that has cascaded down into is, well, some various layers of overcompensation. So the money's been cheap, the perks have been cheap. It's the startup that thinks we've got a bunch of money from an investor, so let's go buy a kegerator, and like there are startups that failed, and the kegerator's like the most awkward thing to sell at the end.
Yeah.
And I think there are jobs that, or hires and dynamics within teams that have a certain kegerator flavor to them. And I wonder how much team dynamics and employment dynamics, and then you start layering on the things that I think of as the Robin Hoodie stuff. Yeah. That, boy, if you can invest in a person, that's a good investment for the company. Yeah. But if you are placating or bribing or kegerating, that stuff has to get weeded out. What do you see? I mean, whether it's tied to the cost of cash now or other dynamics, and certainly since the pandemic, there have been changes that have been made. It feels like there is a need for a reset, revolution, a new orthodoxy, whatever, when we talk about the way teams operate and management is considered, that has to be more holistic. But there's a lot of weeds in the garden right now.
No, you're right.
So how do you tell what's weed? How do you tell what's flower?
Well, that's a great question. And I wish that there was an overnight answer or solution to that. There isn't. I mean, it takes time, but I also think it takes consistency. And, you can see you see these organizations that do kind of, these perk type things, and they will attract, fun, innovative, creative people. That's great. That's what they want, right? And so that may attract them into the doors, but it's not going to keep them there. And, and it's also like, just because you get them in, on a perk, like, you don't want them working for a perk. You want them working because they're engaged and they love the work that they do, right? And so I think a lot of it really comes down, again, to the consistency of, once you get them in the door, what are you doing to develop them? What are you doing to create space that each individual can grow as an individual, but also as a team, that they're focused on, the same goal, and that they are really trying to fight with one another, that's the wrong word, not fight with, fight for one another to achieve and grow and develop toward that goal. A lot of times, though, what happens is people get into the organization. They may have that cool onboarding experience. They're like, oh, there's great perks. There's fun things to do here, blah, 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 whatever. And then, they haven't had a one-on-one with their manager. They don't really know exactly what the clear expectation is. they don't really know what their goals are, that have, because they haven't collaborated on that with their manager. And because of that, like that almost anxiety that kind of starts building internally of like, I hope I'm doing a good job. I don't know if I'm doing a good job, but all those different things. Then all of a sudden it becomes more difficult for me to even talk to you as my manager. And if I'm not talking to you as my manager, I have my manager hat on. I'm busy. I'm thinking, no news is good news. Squeaky wheel gets the oil. Everything's fine. Let's just keep moving on. You know what I mean? When in reality, people are losing their momentum and that level of engagement of what got them there in the first place. So now they're like, well, I don't really have anything extra to do, so I guess I'll just leave at 4 o'clock, or you know what I mean?
Does it come down? I mean, so there's a book by Gilmore and Pine called The Experience Economy. And one of the things in the experience economy that differentiates those brands is novelty. So Starbucks is the king of novelty. But the problem with novelty is you have to keep feeding that machine. And I don't know that novelty and substance are the same thing at all, or value.
Right.
It seems, well, and then I also think we live in a time of life hacks and very few paradigms. And so those novelties that bring you in, the life hacks that are cutesy, that show up in the TikTok videos of the person who is recording how they've squandered somebody else's money for a whole day, that doesn't build anything.
No.
So is it as simple as you invest within your company where the investment layers? So there's value that accrues with each layer. Is it as simple as that?
I don't know. I can't say, is it as simple as that? Like definitively yes or no, but I think, man, that's a great place to start. Like, you know what I mean? And I think for a return on investment perspective, it is the very best place that organizations can put their money right now, is in that development space.
So I've also heard the cute little turn of phrase that's, well, what if we invest so much in this person and they leave? And the response is, well, what if we don't invest in them and they stay?
Yeah.
And so when you get then to the investment, engagement, and retention part, when you're doing the data or when you're thinking about strategy within this, where should retention factor in? Is there a ratio of engagement over retention or retention over engagement when you're calculating ROI?
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't have that statistic off my head. I mean, there are several. There is a statistic that kind of shows like almost like a dollar amount per person or per level of engagement. I can tell you that that it's interesting because there are organizations out there, like on average, I mean, like this is like, there's a big gap between what is considered like really the high performing, highly, what's the right word? Kind of like the high performing organizations from a person perspective versus the average organizations from a person perspective. And so like on average in the US, about a third of your employees are engaged at work. So if you've got a team of 10, about 3 of them are engaged. That doesn't mean that the rest of them are actively disengaged. But what that does mean is that either they're kind of lukewarm, or you may have your 1 to 2, because it's normally about 20%, that are kind of like your water cooler, rotten apple, spoil the bunch crew. Well, right. In these higher performing organizations, they actually have about 70% of their teams are engaged. So it's almost, the number is completely flipped. And you can track in these organizations how and where the breakdown happens. I mean, like, and or where the gap is closed. And it really does, it focuses on a few things. One, making sure that these managers are having weekly conversations, making sure that the C-suite folks are reestablishing what the manager role it really is and bringing it back to the role of people development, not necessarily of processes, and procedures and stuff like that.
But well, that's totally where I was going. So would you double click into that? Because I was
Yeah.
assuming what you were going to say was, so for as much as those onboarding perks are fun, what people really want to know is how am I doing, and am I doing the thing I'm supposed to be doing, which would indicate to me process and procedure. But you're saying that that's it's more than that.
Well, yeah, I'd say it is process and procedure, but it's process and procedure towards your people, not toward whatever it is that you're technically responsible for. Like, so like you know, if you're,
So yeah, can you illustrate that for me?
yeah,
Because I think I might have such that, I don't know, old school. We'll get to masculine and feminine next, I guess. But I feel like I've got a lot of that old curmudgeon type perspective, and so
yeah,
I told you what I need you to do. Go do it. And you're saying no,
yeah.
it's more than that.
I'm saying, you know, I had a, actually, I'll use a story. I had a mentor one time who, you know, by technical performance, um, was a good manager. He did manage out of a place of fear, and he would always say, you know, you hold up a mirror and a lens, and like you'll show me, like you may tell me something, but you're going to show me in your behavior, you know. And there's truth to that, right? People do show you in their behavior, but you can either force results through compliance, which is a kind of a fear-based style of leadership, or you can get a more robust level of performance by not having to hold so tightly to the reins, because you have actually created a space of trust and a space of communication and relational health, and that you're allowing these people that are working with you and for you to sit in and really understand themselves, understand the members of the team, and really kind of start creatively thinking together as a group as to how they can best work together. So, you know, it used to be the manager's responsibility of like, oh, well, I'm going to tell you what to do, and I'm going to tell you what to do, and I'm going to tell you what to do, and you're going to have all these SOPs and all of these KPIs, and this is a thing, and you know, we'll do your annual review and we'll see how you've done, you know.
Right.
And it just, the world just isn't like that anymore. I mean, like that's not how the next generation of work, or even the current generation of workers, wants to be managed. I mean, they don't want a boss. They don't want the curmudgeon, you tell me what to do and I'm going to go do it. You know, they want a coach. They want someone to say, hey, like, I see this in you. Like, you're doing a really great job. And, you know, or, hey, you know, I have this project and I know that your strengths are X, Y, and Z. I think I could really use your help. Or, you know, gosh, you've been so good at onboarding so-and-so. Is this something that you'd be interested in doing for our team? Like, paying attention to those little things, but you can't do that until you actually start sitting down and having regular one-on-one conversations with people. Like they have actually proven, in this last year, they've shown that engagement can significantly increase. First of all, you have about 6 weeks. Like, everyone comes in to your organization, and you know, it's like the honeymoon phase, right? You know, like, oh, the perks are cool, oh, this is fun, like, oh, this person's neat, they're new,
Right.
blah blah blah, whatever. It takes about 6 weeks for reality to kind of start to sit in. So if there isn't a strong hand-holding process, not hand-holding like I'm going to, you know, do your work for you, but like a strong kind of onboarding process, also a strong growth path that people are automatically engaged in and can see and start working toward, then you're going to lose them. And it's at that 6 week, and I don't necessarily mean you're going to physically lose them. You might. I mean, most turnover happens within the first year. I mean, like, you know, but our first 2 years. But you're going to start to lose them from an engagement perspective pretty quickly. And then they start getting, like you, a little cynical, little curmudgeon-y, little of like, they just don't get me. They just don't understand. I mean, like, they're just, you know, they just don't, you know, they don't value me. They don't see me. I actually had a conversation at a doctor's appointment this morning, had a conversation with my nurse about this podcast, actually. And she works in healthcare. And she said, my husband used to get so mad at me for changing jobs all the time. And she's like, that just isn't how he's hardwired. But for me, as a nurse, like, knowing that I could go work just about anywhere, if I am working on a team and I don't feel like that I'm appreciated or that I'm valued or that people see me for like who I am and the contribution that I can make, I don't want to be there, because like, why would I? And I was like, You wouldn't, you know? So,
And that's funny. I mean, and I don't know if it's, there are so many factors that show up. So like my first job out of college was, you know, it was the world's largest ad agency. I made as much money on overtime as I made with my base. And I'd been taught when I'd interned in Manhattan the previous summer, I'd been told, be like a cancer, be on every account you can, however you can, because when you lose an account, you won't get fired. And so I was everywhere all the time, and I did anything I was asked, and said thank you for it. And that had been kind of the approach, you know, I'd been brought up with in high school jobs and stuff too. And my assumption has always been, well, like when I turned 16, I knew not to ask my dad for a car. I knew if he was going to get me a car, he was going to get me a car. If I had any opinions about the car he got me, that was going to go bad.
yeah.
And so one day he shows up with, well, it was a car, and but I'd always, and maybe that's just generational curmudgeon showing up in that. I have another friend who sold here in Indianapolis, who sold his company to Hitachi, and the very, very Japanese culture of Hitachi, you don't get a job title until you're 35.
Mm.
You have work you do. And at one point, he complimented a guy who had just been killing it. He and this person and this person's boss, they're on a train in Japan. And my friend compliments the young guy about, boy, you know, you're doing such a great job. Pretty soon you're going to have this guy's job. And it mortified the young man, who just started apologizing to the older guy, because I'm not trying to say I'm great. I'm not trying to come after you. I would never brag.
Yeah.
And part of me, like, I liked that culture. I liked that. And if it's, you want to come invite me to a project because you see I've got this skills, and I respect your snowflakeness, is what it sounds like to me.
Yeah.
I think maybe we're right on the nerve of, that's not just generational. That might be gender. That might just be, I mean, there are a bunch of just potential dysfunctions I'm labeling there. But what is it? Give me just a cold, hard, here's the reality of it. Here's the truth. I don't care what you think about it and your way. I don't care that offends your sensibility, Pete. Here's the way it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the way it is we are truly facing a massive leadership crisis. And it's everywhere. It's within our organizations. It's within our management levels. It's within our homes. Obviously, it's within, greater areas too.
Mm-hmm.
And, we think that we are very aware, and we think that we are very good at whatever that we have been placed to do, in an organization. But honestly, if I read and again, I'm a futuristic thinker. It's how I'm hardwired. Actually, futuristic is my number one strength. So I could, sit and dream and think about, the future for days on end. But what really fires me up in this space is me thinking, oh my gosh, this is not a new problem, but we are in a new environment. And just like we've seen evolutionary change, basically with every generation, you know what I mean? Like you think about like the millennials or whatever, like they never did not have a cell phone, you know what I mean? Or, you know what I mean? Like, whereas you and I, we had landlines, we remember, those things. As all of these things are changing, people are evolving, and they are becoming more self-aware. And they're also becoming more, one of the things I've seen actually in this younger generation that I find is very intriguing compared to even our generation is how emotionally intelligent they are. Way more emotionally intelligent, way more in tune with their emotions. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're fully developed in that space, right? But they are more aware of emotions. And I think that, as we transition, we've gone through these stages of growth where I'll even use the organization that I had worked for a number of years. That organization when I first started working there was really focused on culture and really focused on people and integrity and excellence. And then over the course of time, we kind of had this Six Sigma mode of, efficiency, and then we kind of transitioned to like, how can we become more efficient? And, efficiency, because of kind of like what you were talking about, even the life hacks that we live in today, we are a fast paced, get me my result quickly done, period, move on. That's creating, though, this huge divide at a level of relationship that is becoming so transactional that it's actually, instead of creating unity and bringing people together, it's creating more of an isolation and more of a divide. And so now my interaction with you, if you're my boss, and I am stressed to the hilt because I know that our company is not performing in the way that it should be performing, and responsibility lies on me for that. Like, my self-preservation is going to kick in, and I'm going to be like, what can you give me today, Pete? What, I mean, like, and then you start to feel that pressure, right? And then you're like, oh my gosh. And then your self-preservation starts to kick in, and everyone just scurries, and they have all of this anxiety and all this tension and all of this stuff that starts to surface. And eventually it's going to come out. And, it really is a time that, like, if you look at where these organizations are heading, I mean, like this last year, small businesses, this has been like one of the highest number of years for small businesses to close their doors because they haven't been able to succeed.
Yep.
And, everything that we do inside an organization, whether we believe it or not, revolves around people. So really, when you think about it, like when you're talking about buying cash or paying cash for cash or whatever, the greatest, I believe, as we step into the next 5 to 10 years of business, the greatest asset that we have is relational capital, because it's the thing that unites all of us. Like, if we have relational capital in the bank, we can have more deposits, and we can have more withdrawals, and we can get things done through people, which, when you think about leadership, C-suite or managers, if you are not getting things done through your people in a way that you don't have to harp on them. Because if you think about it, like if somebody has to be on your back every single day, or you feel like you have to tell this person every single day what to do, that's putting 10 extra activities on your back than it is, them just trusting the fact that you trust them and that you guys are growing together because you've established goals. So it really, it's almost like this flip of a lens of like, let's slow down a little bit and let's reposition where we put our time and our effort. Because where we're going to get our greatest return on investment is in helping people grow to become the person that I believe that God has created them to be. Like, help like let them shine in their environment, and let them be recognized for that and rewarded for that, and let them be developed in that way. But if I'm a team member and I'm working for you, and you don't, like, going back to what I said about that guy that says, show me your behaviors and I'll show you how you really, are really showing up. Like, if you tell me that, like, I'm important to you, like, my team is important to me, like, you guys are the most important thing, like, we can't succeed without all of you, all that. But you don't actually show me that in your day-to-day. You don't take the time to have robust one-on-one conversations with me. You don't take the time to actually coach me. You don't take the time to actually know me. You don't take the time to help me discover like what I'm naturally good at and where I'm getting in my own way that I don't see. And you're not helping me kind of create this path to help you and help the organization. Then why would I want to do that? And so it's just, it's mind blowing to me and heart wrenching at the same time, because like, I have seen through years of experience how when people are treated and grown and developed into the fullness of their potential, like what that produces versus where they feel like they've almost been stripped of their identity. And that, those two things create massive impact at a variety of levels. I mean, like, when I left my organization, I left because I said, hey, I'm going to go raise my 3 daughters. My nanny was doing that and that felt horrible for me. I'm going to go do that. And that was noble. But the truth is, I left because I was so burned out and so crisp that I didn't even know who I was anymore. And then that led to a whole nother series of issues. And we see this all the time organizationally. I can't tell you how many people I've seen in leadership, in management, who have burned themselves out so bad that they have basically taken everything down with them. They've taken down their family. I mean, like it just like, and it's not worth it. And it's like, it doesn't have to be this way. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, like, they're like, we have to help people see that they are whole people, that that emotions are okay, because for a long time we've said that they weren't,
Right.
that emotions are okay because we have them. We have a lot of them, actually. I forgot how many actual emotions there are, but the average person can only name 4. And there's like hundreds, maybe thousands,
Yeah.
Um, we've gotten so dumbed down and into the weeds, going back to the weeds and the flowers, that people are just, they're walking around like they're dead. I mean, like it's like, it's like the treadmill, the rat race. Like, I just got to get through this day. I'm gonna sleep. I'll start it tomorrow. I'll get to Friday, and then the next thing I know, 5 years have passed, and I still feel the same way. And I feel like, is this really it? Is this like what life is? I mean, like, this is miserable. And I really believe that if we can get to the heart of the matter, which is really creating these environments where people feel seen, heard, valued, and really part of something bigger than themselves, then we see them start to wake up, and we see energy rise. And we think about like sales. Think about a sales organization. If I'm the CEO of a sales company, like, what's your number one driver? Numbers, right? I mean, like, it's your
Right.
number one thing, right? But like, who's selling? Your people are selling, right? Well, and who do they sell to? Well, they sell to your customer, and we see this. I've seen this a thousand times too. So and so on the sales team's feeling a little disgruntled, a little upset. Their customers are their friends. They've formulated relationships with these people. So who gets the word as to what's happening at the organizational level? The customer, through the
Right.
lens of the employee. And so that employee experience, it's not like this pie in the sky, like, oh, you don't have to work. We're just going to tell you that you're great, blah, 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 blah. That's not it at all. It's how do we help them become effective in their own leadership? Because at any level, regardless of whether you're the guy on the front line working at McDonald's or you are in the C-suite, you are a leader, because leadership is influence. That's it, and how you show up in that moment matters. Like the words you choose, the actions you have, the energy you bring, the solutions you provide, all of it matters. And if you're not comfortable in your own skin and you don't necessarily think that you matter, it's really, really hard to help other people feel that way.
Well,
Long
and that's
answer.
part of
Sorry.
no. Well, so and I this will be my last. The masculine feminine reference. I tend to think of male relationships tend to be hierarchical, more like a wolf pack. Everybody knows who the alpha is. Um, I think female relationships tend to be more like a sheep herd.
Yep.
But there's no equivalent for bitch in male culture.
Yeah.
And it's bad news for women. If you tell a man he's an asshole, he doesn't care. Um, and so to the point about being seen and heard, there tends to be a bias, and this is a perverted thing. I mean, anything that is described as boys will be boys
Yeah.
is bad for everybody, and then boys who are boys turn into guys, and there's a big difference between being a guy and a man.
Yeah.
And I think you become a man when wives start recognizing that's a good man. And so it's weird how I think the maturation of one gender is affirmed by the other.
Yeah.
But when I think about the, you have to take care of yourself thing. So the command intent is expressed from on high. And well, so it's up to you as the employee to come figure it out and then go with it. And so the company you worked with, this was 25 years ago. There was a group of black employees who came and said, we're being promoted at an unfair rate. We can prove it. And the math indicated that there was a problem. And it turns out that the source was that the company had dropped its management training program. And so the one-on-one coaching about soft skill things, for as much as that organization might be seen in the world as sort of the Starship Enterprise that's on the far side of racial divides and cultural gaps, and everybody is one, there was still a certain percentage where there were Black employees who were not being coached, but were being evaluated on a default evaluation scale, which of course was the default was a white scale because that was the cultural footprint. Probably there would be an argument that that default footprint was the most effective as well. But that quite apart, there was an ethical failure on the part of the company to equip all employees to succeed. And so there was a punitive potential consequence that didn't actually end up happening, but changes needed to be made. And the reinstitution of the management training was the approach of that, and personal development scores within the grading process. I think that for as much as I have a tendency from my background to do this, well, tough it out. It's the John Wayne, I'm going to teach you to swim by throwing you into the pond
Yeah.
thing. Well, that's kind of a stupid way to go.
It's a little
And if
archaic.
you want, it's archaic, and there's just a bunch of. It turns out that's not how you would treat somebody you love, and so, but there are also significant consequences if you don't.
Yeah.
And then in terms of your ability, if you're the leader, to achieve the goals you've articulated, if your mental approach is to throw people into the lake, or you're not going to do this management training, or you're not going to pursue a person back to the requesting them join a project because the manager has paid attention and seen where your gifts are, there's a real gap in that.
Yeah.
So I guess the reason I keep taking it back to my biases on this and my wirings is I see there is a real problem if we don't find a way to build in what I'm in a lazy way calling a feminine wisdom in this.
Yeah.
But what yeah.
It seems, it's interesting because I mean, it seems big. I mean, like it seems, pie in the sky, Pollyanna, blah blah blah. Like, and it almost seems too, kind of like even as you were talking about, like the feminine wisdom versus the masculine wisdom, and how men tend to kind of show up on on certain things, and kind of like, this is it, get it done, like those types of things. I mean, like it seems like it's very complicated, but it's really not. I mean, like there's process to it, and it's not a hard process, but it's a process that requires discipline, and it's a process that has to take priority over a lot of other processes that we think have historically driven the bottom line. And like, even if you think about the archaic piece of like throwing people in the lake or whatever, well, I mean, like, even culturally, as I've talked about, like generational change, the expectations of what the baby boomers wanted in a job is completely different than what the millennials and the Gen Zs want in a job. And that doesn't make it wrong. It's just different, right? The generation, with every generation, we have seen differences. And and it's like, for the people who are in leadership right now, for the C-suites, for the people who are building these companies, that this is their legacy, right? This is the thing that they want to that they are putting their blood and their sweat and their tears into, that they feel so socially responsible for. Like, we have to be looking at the future for that. We can't be looking at the past, and
Right.
And to look at the future, we have to say, well, where are the gaps? Well, the gaps are at our management level. Okay. Well, what is it that the manager needs to do differently? Well, you know what? The manager has done a really great job, in the technical aspects of whatever that job is that they're overseeing. But we need to start skilling them and arming them with tools and resources to be able to effectively develop people. And and when we do that, it's not hard, it's not rocket science, but like, over 50% of the managers right now will tell you that they have not been developed appropriately to lead in today's environment. I mean, like, they just haven't.
So You talked about social responsibility. You used the phrase, and that made the corporate social responsibility, you know, justice warrior trigger happen.
Mm,
I have to imagine that. So, even as I was talking about the masculine summary type things, I wish that the first rule that was taught at church more often was don't be an asshole. And because after that, everything gets easier. And there's a certain sense of, so you have the prerogative to be an asshole. What if you chose not to? And how do you diffuse that? But if you then switch all the way into the affirmative, there is a justice component. There is a social. If you choose to believe that people bear the image of God, if you choose to lead a business with an awareness of God's agenda being the reconciliation of people, whether or not those employees ever join the club and wear the T-shirt, that's quite apart. They deserve to be treated in a way that recognizes their true identity according to your convictions about their value. I mean, there isn't a higher standard to live to within that. Um, what when you take B23 in and you're able to speak to, call it social justice, call it responsibility, it seems like the source for the leverage or the force that gets applied is more proactive, more positive, where a lot of the corporate social responsibility stuff tends to be a guilt manipulation. It's you corporations start from a debt posture, and boy, I think a person who gets guilt leveraged on them is almost inherently an emotionally immature person.
yeah.
That when you see that ultimatum walking in the door, the right response is to kick them out.
Yeah.
So how do you invite stepping into responsibility without getting manipulated by the contemporary social, the agenda driven stuff that often leeches on, and uses the same words?
Yeah. That's a great question. I'm not fully sure I have an answer for it. So I'm just going to.
Well, so where does it show up? Where do you see when a person who gets it, who you've worked with clients who genuinely love their people
Mhm.
and are wanting you there, for example, to be the translator to my daughter,
Yeah.
or they don't want the injustice, but they know they need to learn how to coach the subset of the employees or whatever. What do you see in them that you admire compared to people who are getting chased by a corporate social justice warrior mindset?
The first word that comes to mind, honestly, is humility. Um, because I feel like that, you know, um, well, there's a new book I just out by, oh gosh, the Table Group and Patrick Lencioni, and it basically talks about the attributes of what is necessary for a good team member and a good teammate. And the three things are that you have to be hungry, that you have to be humble, and that you have to be smart. But it's not the humility piece is something like hunger. You see hunger in people. You know what I mean? Like it's pretty easy to find. The humility piece, a lot of people kind of look humble on the surface, or maybe they downplay themselves thinking that they're being humble.
Right.
Um, but in reality, they're really not. And then the smart piece is not like the IQ piece. It's the emotional intelligence piece of the self and others awareness that comes into play. And what I have seen with, the organizations that we really enjoy working with is they have this sense of humility to say, I know this is a problem. I don't know how to fix it. I mean, but I want what's best for my people and I want what's best for my organization. And I know that lies within my people. And so I want to be able to kind of unlock and unleash that. And so, for us, when that happens, it's like, we take all of the things that are like, keeping them up at night, because there's a bazillion, and we say, okay, what part of this can we bring down to the quickest return on investment and the biggest bang for our buck. And then, and then we show them how we kind of take that down to that manager level. But, you said something earlier too that I want to address that I think is so important, even as we are talking about this development space. It's not just that, the C-suite people say, okay, yeah, go do this. Okay. Or the managers say, okay, yeah, we're going to do this initiative, so, and maybe they're kicking and screaming on the inside. But even if you go back to what you said about like some guy saying like, well, he's like an asshole, like it's just okay. You know what I mean? Like, well, it's okay. But the question is why? Why is he an asshole for one? And why is it okay? Like,
Yeah, I like the second question better. Yeah,
because I mean, like in reality, it's not okay. I mean, like, so I mean, like if you're going to be an asshole, you have a choice, right? If you're choosing to be an asshole, like you are undermining your influence. And, if you have influence in this world, if biblically we do go to the whole, premise, and this is kind of how B23 works, the fact that I told you that we believe strongly in the power of people. We believe that like God has uniquely gifted every single person with what they need to do the work that they've been assigned to do to make the impact that they are supposed to make on this world. And it is their responsibility, mine included for myself and you for yours, to help grow that inside of us with him. So what I like, I mean, like you can't really do it without him, but I mean, like, with him
right.
to then be able to live that out missionally and on purpose. And, and when that happens, you see people just like this freedom emerges, this sense of awakeness emerges, the sense of oh my gosh, I'm part of something bigger here. Like it's more than just me. And that makes me feel good. Like I'm starting to like really be able to develop into something. So when I think about the leader that I really want to work with, it's the one that's humble enough to say, I see that from a vision perspective. I don't know how to get there. But I see it because I mean, I do know how to get there. Like I feel like that, and one of the things too that, that I feel like is different. Like, when we come inside of an organization, it's funny. You've kind of talked about this before of that feminine wisdom. I can lean in all that. I used to have to coach people. That didn't work for me. This is actually before I became a manager. I would have to coach men or mentor men who kind of were very aggressive, like almost like borderlining asshole, you know what I mean? Like, trying to like really kind of calm them down. And my boss would always say, I need you to talk to them because you are assertive. You're not aggressive. And I think that that's that feminine, masculine piece that, is kind of like bubbling up to the surface. I've sat in a room. I had a team once of 8 people. 7 of them were men. I had every single one of those men crying in that room, because I was being assertive, but I wasn't being damaging. You know what I mean? Like it's like there's a place where you have to have high support and high challenge. And we have to teach people that it's okay to challenge as long as there's support. And it's okay to support, but not without challenge, because if you do, you're just you're not growing them, right? And so it's creating these spaces. I think the other thing we have to do is we have to create a common language. Like, when a leader starts down this path and their managers start down this path, like the organization needs a common language. And that common language can be found in talking about, your strength, your leadership voice. Like, it takes the personal sting out of things. Like if I know, that, if I know that I'm a pioneer and I know that I am in a room full of nurturers, like I know that I have to approach them differently than if I'm speaking to a room full of pioneers. That's my responsibility. If I want to make the most impact that I have, that's my responsibility to know that and to do that. And so, we've just armed ourselves with so many tools and resources that honestly, I feel like that God has just put in front of us as we've been trying to build B23 to be what I believe that he wants it to be, which is, an organization, a leadership development platform that helps others lead with love and understand really what that means. And in doing so, we talk about the 2 greatest commandments, right? We don't, not from a work perspective, obviously, but 2 things we know: love God, with all your heart, your soul, your mind, whatever, and then love others as you love yourself. Well, I can tell you on this journey, as we have been working with people and understanding people, people don't love themselves well. And so if you don't love yourself well, if you're stuck in that asshole mode, if you're stuck in like in the stressors and the unhealthy forms of your own personality and your own strengths, and you kind of got all these layers of stuff on you, like what you're giving out to the world is not great. It's average at
Yep.
best. And so, like, we want to just remove all that. We want to help people see that, like, here are some tools and resources. These are easy to implement. They are useful. They help people grow. You can use them to help people coach. It takes all of the I have to figure all this stuff out on my own off the table. And it just gives them a robust roadmap to be able to follow, to say, okay, if I do this thing over the course of time, I am going to see a greater result. You know, the sad thing is like, obviously it doesn't happen overnight, but like it does happen. I've seen it time and time and time again, and it's beautiful when it does.
Well, and what you just said, but then also when you were talking about the room with the 7 crying men, the assertion versus terror of domination is really interesting. Like my right hand in the work I do is a really emotionally intelligent woman. And as we were figuring out how we were going to work together, the 2 big words were she needed to trust me, and I knew that the most critical word for me was submit to her. And I'm the one making the choices, but but man, do I benefit from and experience comfort in the choice to submit to her. And it's interesting when you talk about those 7 men, they they were given a choice to submit. You earned submission, and that's one of those words that it's easier. I think that's a hard word for my wife anyway.
Oh yeah,
Okay,
it's a
because
hard word.
submission's been used
Way too
in
much.
a weaponized fashion for on women.
Yeah,
Where men, it's been I've got a coach. I do what my coach tells me to do,
yeah,
and that domination of submission says if I submit now, I get something later.
yeah,
But the way you just talked about submitting to a process, but if you can get all the way to submit, it would be an interesting word for B23 proposals and conversations as you're closing. We want to know, can you submit to this?
yeah.
And
That's good.
I bet male leaders can do that in a different sort of way, because there's a promise that you're leading with that is a different sort of investment than I think a lot of times men take in.
Yeah,
But I think men want to know, how do I join that army? How do I submit to that thing? Because if I trust the thing, I believe it's going to deliver me somewhere.
yeah.
But that word comes to mind.
Yeah, it's interesting. Oh, I actually like that. I'm going to write that down. That would be a fun little play to see how it shakes out. But it's so interesting because dynamically, I feel like that. You know, even there are a lot of, I mean, and this isn't like, it really isn't gender specific. There are a lot of men in leadership who really are very, still hard nosed. I'm in control. I'm driving the ship. Get your butt in the seat. Type
Right.
leader. And then there are the leaders that really are more of that humble servant style of leadership, and people thrive under more of that humble servant style, to know that people are for them and with them, than they do by the controlling style of feeling like that they're forced into something. And it's it's just it is so it's goes back, I guess, again to this word humility. Like, the leaders who really want to make a difference will. I mean, like, they don't know how, but they're willing. The pain that they have, the exhaustion that they have, the frustration that they have, and that what they want to get to on the other side is worth it to them to submit. And what we find so often is, and I found this honestly for myself, I'll be honest with this, in the process of building the framework that we use at B23, I really thought in my brain, as I was building it, I was looking at the person I was building it for, right? So I was thinking through the lens of, what is this manager facing? What is this team member feeling? What is this individual who's really wanting to have a higher level of impact in their life, like, feeling? And what I realized, though, as I was building it, that even though I kind of pride myself in being pretty aware, like, statistically speaking, like I really wasn't that aware. And so when I started using these tools for myself and I started growing in my own journey, I was like, oh my goodness, like regardless of where you are on your journey, like as you start using these tools and as you really start taking in what I believe that God wants you to see about yourself, and wants you to bring alive in yourself, like you could do it from now until you die and you're still going to be discovering new things about yourself. But the cool part is that in the process, you understand when you're stuck. You understand when your peace is not where it needs to be. You understand when your response to your daughter creates another response, and you think to yourself, oh shoot, I did not get that one right. I'm going to submit and I'm going to apologize. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to have
Yeah.
a conversation, right? So you get to these layers so much more easily, and it heals and grows and develops not only you as a person, but the relationships around you, which then allow for greater collaboration. And if you think about today, most teams, and again, like this problem hasn't shown up in a day, and it's not going to go away in a day. But I'm looking for leaders to stand up and say, I'm not going to take this anymore. Like, I'm tired of this. Like, I'm tired of doing the same thing over and over and over again and not getting a result. And I'm tired of trying the flavor of the month. And I'm tired of, people not showing up at work and not caring. And I'm tired of it. And I want something different. And they're willing to put their money where their mouth is, get their head out of the sand, look at the future of where the workplace is leading them, and say, okay, I'm going to make this investment for my people. And I'm going to do it because it's the right thing to do, because I am a servant leader and I am putting their needs ahead of my own, realizing that when I do that, I'm actually going to get a return on my investment, probably tenfold.
Well, at least, because the whole operation lives and dies with the health of the liver in that sense. So, other than that mindset, how else would a person know that they are a good candidate to call you? What revenue size or what employee count do you find? How big do they need to be for you to make sense to them? And then how else do you want to go by industry? Who else who might see this should say, I should call Tracy if dot dot dot.
Yeah. We're still new enough that we're trying to figure out this whole revenue side of like what is the best fit, organizationally. We've worked with organizations we've worked with nonprofits that have like very low budgets, all the way up to multi $1 million organizations. And I think that really what it boils down to is how big is the pain point and where is it, and how many layers of red tape are there? Like, so for example, like, I know that if we work with small to mid-sized organizations, 20 million, I don't know, 5 to 20 million, maybe, I mean, like, we can see the ship turn a little bit more quickly than the organizations that are really, really big with multiple layers and, multiple events. I mean, or like multiple teams. And that's not to say that we wouldn't work with them, but I think really it comes down to how many layers are there in the decision making and how many layers of people do you have to get on board? Because if it's basically, the C-suite and then your director manager level, like that's really where we can turn the ship fairly quickly. And I think that what we hear a lot is, like our teams just aren't performing the way that they should. Like there just seems to be so much strife. They're just not working well together. Like it doesn't feel like that they trust each other, or that like, we're leading through change, but no one wants to actually take on this change. And they almost feel like that they're hitting their head against the wall. Like it's just like a frustration of feeling I feel stuck. And then the pressure of the sale or the money or the whatever that's supposed to be coming in is building as well. And so, if anyone organizationally says those things like my teams aren't performing the way that they should, like we just feel stuck, like our turnover has been extremely high. We've had a lot of change. Like that's actually has been one of my favorite spaces when people say we've had a lot of change and we need somebody to come in, create that common language and solidify us. That's super fun. Then there are
those are the hardest clients. I mean, for me on the brand side, if it's two entities of similar size who are merging, that's a nightmare of messaging. And I would imagine, well, and I've seen them culturally, two different cities and they don't reconcile.
Yeah. It's hard, for sure. And I also really like working with fast-paced organizations. I think that they're, like not every organization is has a fast, more technology speed type organizations, because they tend to take in information and they tend to be a little bit more coachable, at least in my experience so far. And they tend to then like gravitate toward how they can grow, because it's one thing for us to be able to give all this, right? It's one thing for us to be able to handhold and help the leader and help the manager and all the different things. But, if that leader or that manager isn't really interested, in doing this, like we can lead the horse to the water and we can tell them that it's plentiful, but it's their choice as to whether or not they drink. Right. And so if organizations can't, like if they're not engaged and they're not like willing to really kind of have that forward thinking space, like it's just it's harder to move the needle. And I don't ever want to bring anything to an organization that doesn't provide value. I don't want transactional, there's enough of that in the world. I don't want, hey, give me your money and I'll come in and, give you this one thing and we'll, move on. I want you to actually be able to receive it. I want you to take it in. I want you to ingest it. I want you to have action around it. And I want you to start developing, and having your own growth and your own like aha moments and your own like wins, from it. And I think that one thing that differentiates Janelle and I, and then I'll stop talking, but
no, well, so far you're giving me my favorite answer of the whole conversation. So finish it, but I'll tell you why.
The one thing that I feel like that differentiates Janelle and I is that all the things that we talk about, that we preach, like the whole, you need to be seen, you need to be heard, you need to be valued, stuff like that. Like those are the principles we live by. Like if you go look at our core values, like those are the principles that we live by. Like, we believe that, leadership is a gift. And we believe that the greatest gift, that it's one of the greatest gifts that you can give someone else. We believe that, each and every person is unique and deserves to be developed and seen and grown into the richness of who they have the potential of becoming. And from a heart perspective, like I'm more of the challenger for sure. She's more of the encourager, like we kind of, balance each other out that way. But from the heart perspective, like I may never be able to walk into an organization and lead with Jesus. And I'm okay with that. But that does not mean that I cannot walk into an organization and lead with his heart and have them feel something different on the other side of me. And that's my goal. I want to make sure that I'm leading people better than I found them, and that they are feeling inspired and equipped and empowered to step into the next phase of, whatever is on their heart to become.
Well, in the 2-3, was it Philippians 2-3?
Philippians 2-3, yeah.
Which is what?
Do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility consider others more important than yourself. And
so the letter B means like behave, like be this.
Yeah.
This
so we
way.
Basically say we deliver strategies for becoming 2-3. You know what I mean? So, and I also have the caveat here of saying like people, when they hear that, they're like, oh, well, that they think servant leadership. Yes, sort of. But they also get stuck on this whole like, well, like I need to downplay myself. Other people, I need to elevate other people and I need to downplay myself. And that's not true. That just means thinking of yourself less and thinking of others more. You know what I mean? Like just fighting for the greater good.
So what made that last answer my favorite answer was you're supposed to have a Sandler sales quick pitch. We serve, we do 2-year engagements of $200,000 or more, starting at $200,000 or more for businesses in this space of this revenue size and this head count. And that's supposed to be, in traditional terms, masculine terms, about a 15-second
Oh,
answer
yeah.
tops. And
I'll
I
be here.
love
She's not
that.
here yet.
Well, no, but we've had that exact conversation. We've had that, and you you insist on leading with what I hear in that whole thing is, we're going to meet you where you are. We're going to figure out what you need. We can absolutely spec out what the program's going to be, but we're not selling from a commodity space or a widgetized answer, a cheap answer that you're going to vet before we've had a conversation together. That is an example to me, and one of the most charming of the feminine wisdom showing up.
Mm.
And it's like, no, this is how we are. And certainly it makes some of those conversations less efficient. But if it turns out that you love your people and you want to be 2-3, call us and we're going to figure it out together.
Yeah.
And there's we trust you to be able to hear that, and we expect you to be able to submit to the wisdom we can bring you. And that's that's part of the reason I wanted you to be in this call with me today, is because it's part of what I really respect and admire, and find myself continually humbled to see the number of curmudgeonly places, whether it's with my daughter or with others, that I'm excited to weed out and to improve on. It's tedious and it's frustrating, and then I have all of the backlash about where I see it show up on my LinkedIn scroll. I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
that's an idiot way of thinking, and crap, I just used it to feed, a more immediate problem.
Oh.
So I'm going to put your contact information in the notes, and I hope people will reach out to you on this stuff. Thank you so much for your time today. It's always good to talk to you.
I know. I love it. I love having conversations with you, and I love how you see the world, even though sometimes it's a little curmudgeon.
Well, with that, I'm going to hang up on you.
Yeah,
so, thank you. I'm going to push the pause button, and then we're going to have our file upload. Okay? So,
that's good.
Thank you.
Thanks.